There is a precise moment, a subtle shift in behavior that tells you everything you need to know about what is happening inside the mind of a narcissist long after you've walked away. Most people think that when a narcissist goes silent, blocks you, or flaunts a new life, it means they've moved on. They assume the game is over. But if you know how to read the human operating system, if you understand how ego defenses actually function under pressure, you know that silence is rarely peaceful. It is often calculated. Narcissistic obsession doesn't look like traditional affection. It doesn't look like flowers on your doorstep or romantic pleas for a second chance. Narcissistic obsession is about authority, control, and the desperate preservation of a constructed self-image. When a narcissist loses control over you, their internal architecture fractures. They cannot digest the idea that your life continues without them acting as the central axis. So how do you know if they are truly done or if they are privately consumed by your absence? In behavioral psychology, every action leaves a footprint. When someone becomes fixated, their baseline changes. They display specific, highly predictable cues, subtle micro-behaviors designed to test whether your psychological door is still cracked open. They will execute subtle pattern shifts. They will deploy indirect probes. They will deliberately attempt to trigger an emotional response from you, because to a narcissist, your emotional reaction, whether anger, curiosity, or sadness, is proof that they still hold power over your psychological state. If you don't recognize these behavioral markers, you risk falling straight back into the dynamic. You might mistake their covert bids for attention as genuine remorse, or you might unintentionally send them a signal that invites them back into your space. By the end of this speech, you will understand the exact behavioral indicators that reveal a narcissist is still deeply obsessed with you. And more importantly, you will learn the precise tactical response to keep them completely disarmed. Pay close attention to sign number 3, because it is the most common trap people walk into without ever realizing it. Let's cut right to the core of human behavior. When you break away from a narcissistic dynamic, you aren't just ending a relationship. You are withdrawing the lifeblood of someone's fragile ego architecture. The question isn't whether they noticed. The question is, what are they doing behind the scenes now that you're gone? Right now, you might be asking yourself if they've forgotten about you, or if they're lying awake trying to figure out how to reclaim their grip on your life. If you leave this video early, you are going to miss the exact baseline shifts that separate genuine moving on from hyper-fixated, covert tracking. Stay through to the end, because understanding these 5 behavioral signals will not only give you absolute clarity on their internal state, but it will also ensure you never get pulled back into their reality again. Signal 1. The accidental microprobe. Watch for small, seemingly meaningless intrusions into your environment. A missed call at 2 a.m. that gets hung up after one ring. A blank text. A sudden, unprovoked view on a social media story from an account they haven't used in months. In behavioral analysis, this is called probing for a baseline response. They aren't trying to start a conversation. They are dropping a pebble into the water to measure the ripple. If you react, if you text back, "Did you mean to call me?" you have just confirmed that your line of communication is active and that your focus is still turned toward them. Signal 2. Third-party triangulation. When a narcissist can no longer reach you directly, they widen the net. They begin dropping subtle, carefully staged pieces of information into the orbits of your mutual acquaintances. They might casually mention to a friend how much they hope you're doing well, or tell someone in your circle a dramatic story designed to make its way back to you. They are relying on social transmission to bypass your block list. If people in your periphery suddenly start bringing up the narcissist out of nowhere, understand this: it was engineered. Signal 3. the manufactured crisis. This is where the fixation escalates. If soft probes fail, a narcissist will often stage a high-stakes scenario, an urgent health scare, a sudden financial disaster, or a dramatic personal victory. The goal here is psychological leverage. They need an excuse big enough to override your boundary and make you look cold or uncaring if you remain silent. When a narcissist is obsessed, they will willingly manufacture chaos just to force your attention back to the stage they control. Signal 4. The phantom mirroring effect. Pay attention to whether they begin adopting your personal vocabulary, hobbies, aesthetic, or philosophical stances publicly. When a narcissist cannot possess you, their subconscious often attempts to assimilate attributes of your identity to signal a false sense of growth or connection. If you notice them suddenly displaying habits or views that you spent months trying to explain to them, it isn't an accident. It is a broadcast aimed directly at your subconscious mind, engineered to make you think they finally get it. Signal 5. Aggressive indifference. The paradox of narcissistic obsession is that intense indifference requires immense effort. When someone has genuinely moved on, their posture toward you is neutral, passive, and quiet. But if a narcissist goes out of their way to make sure you see how happy, successful, or unbothered they are, posting exaggerated displays of fulfillment, or making dramatic public statements about moving forward, it is an active performance. True moving on is silent. Loud detachment is just obsession wearing a mask. When you disengage from a narcissist, the immediate operational reality in their mind isn't grief, sadness, or acceptance. It is a sudden, alarming drop in expected input. In human behavior, when a conditioned reward structure suddenly stops producing, the subject undergoes what behavioral psychologists call an extinction burst. They don't simply walk away, they ramp up their attempts to reestablish the baseline. But because a narcissist often wants to maintain the illusion of complete control and cold superiority, they will rarely execute a direct, vulnerable move right away. Instead, they pivot to covert surveillance, the ghost shift. The ghost shift occurs when their target transitions from an active participant in the conflict dynamic to an unobservable variable. To a narcissist, an unobservable variable is a threat. They need to know if your silence is a temporary emotional reaction, which means they still own your mental bandwidth, or if it represents genuine, permanent detachment. To figure this out without risking direct rejection, they begin tracking your digital and social footprint through low-visibility channels. This isn't casual curiosity. It is tactical intelligence gathering. They will monitor the exact timing of your activity online, watch who you interact with, or observe your daily habits from secondary accounts or through mutual connections. They are looking for micro-fluctuations in your behavior, a sudden melancholic post, a change in your routine, or even a direct statement about moving on. Any of these signals gives them a read on your emotional posture. If you post something angry or sad, they register it as a victory, because emotional dysregulation on your end proves that your baseline is still tethered to their ghost. When they realize that covert observation isn't giving them enough data, because you've gone entirely quiet or locked down your footprint, they execute a pattern interruption. They intentionally create a micro-event designed to disrupt your calm state and force a physical or digital reaction. They might watch a story within seconds of you posting it, only to immediately block you again. They might send a vague, non-committal system alert, like a late-night view from a burner account, or accidentally like a post from 3 years ago before quickly unlinking it. These actions are deliberate behavioral probes. The core objective of a pattern interruption is to break your internal focus and make you ask the exact question they want in your mind. Why did they just do that? The second your brain begins attempting to analyze their intent, the pattern interruption has succeeded. They have successfully inserted themselves back into your internal monologue. Understanding this dynamic requires recognizing that the ghost shift is a symptom of extreme internal instability on their part. The moment you stop feeding their ego framework, their internal baseline collapses, forcing them to hunt for subtle validation that you are still affected by them. Every micro-invasion into your digital space is a silent request for you to prove they still matter. When we analyze Keynote number 2, micro-invasions and accidental probes, we are looking at one of the most calculated tactical maneuvers in the entire narcissistic playbook. Once a narcissist senses that you are slipping outside their sphere of influence, their primary objective shifts from direct control to testing your defenses. They need to know if the perimeter you've established around your life is solid or permeable. To do this without risking their own fragile ego through direct rejection, they employ micro-invasions, small, indirect, and highly ambiguous boundary breaches designed to elicit a baseline response from you. A micro-invasion is specifically structured to give them plausible deniability. It will never look like a clear, direct attempt to reconcile or apologize, because a clear attempt puts the power in your hands to accept or reject them. Instead, it manifests as a phantom notification, a 2 a.m. phone call that rings exactly once before being terminated, a blank text message, or a casual package sent to your address containing an insignificant item you left behind months ago. It can even be as subtle as an accidental Venmo request or a shared document notification sent from a secondary email account. From a behavioral perspective, these actions are drop-tested probes. The underlying psychology is simple. Drop a pebble into the water and measure the size of the ripple. The narcissist doesn't actually care about the item they returned or the reason for the accidental call. They care about the exact nature of your reaction. If you respond, even if your response is angry, defensive, or demanding that they leave you alone, you have failed the test in their eyes. To a narcissist, an angry response is not a rejection. It is an emotional payout. It informs them that your emotional infrastructure is still responsive to their input, that you are still thinking about them, and that your boundaries can be breached with minimal effort. If you don't respond to the first probe, the micro-invasions will often escalate in frequency or emotional baiting. They will engineer scenarios that almost force a human being with standard social conditioning to reply out of basic courtesy or confusion. They are counting on your politeness, your need for closure, or your desire to correct a misunderstanding. They leverage human empathy against you, knowing that standard social protocol dictates acknowledging a message or clarifying an error. The danger of a micro-invasion lies in its ability to consume your cognitive bandwidth. The moment you receive an ambiguous contact, your brain naturally seeks patterns and explanations, plunging you into an analytical loop where you spend hours discussing with friends or pondering internally. Was that really an accident? What are they trying to say? This internal loop is the exact outcome the narcissist intended. Even without a reply, they have successfully invaded your psychological landscape and interrupted your peace. Recognizing a micro-invasion requires seeing past the surface-level pretext and identifying the structural intent behind the behavior. Every accidental probe is an active attempt to verify whether the psychological umbilical cord has been severed. They are seeking a baseline indicator to determine if you are still monitorable, reachable, and controllable, using low-risk mechanics to exploit any crack in your operational resolve. To understand Keynote number 3, narcissistic injury versus obsession, we must deconstruct what happens beneath the surface when a narcissist's core psychological defenses are fundamentally breached. Most people confuse narcissistic obsession with intense longing, nostalgic regret, or a deep emotional attachment to a past partner. In reality, a narcissist does not experience obsession through the lens of human connection. They experience it as the hyper-fixation on an unresolved ego breach. What appears to an outsider as a passionate attempt to reclaim a lost relationship is actually the desperate effort of an unstable psyche trying to repair a catastrophic internal collapse known as a narcissistic injury. A narcissistic injury occurs the exact moment you alter your baseline behavior and refuse to participate in their grandiosity, control, or reality. It happens when you set an unshakable boundary, expose a lie, or, most critically, walk away on your own terms before they have discarded you. When you initiate the disconnect or treat them with complete indifference, you shatter the carefully constructed narrative that they are superior, indispensable, and immune to rejection. The sudden drop in control forces them to confront a brief, agonizing glimpse of their own core inadequacy and shame. Because their ego framework cannot process or metabolize shame, it instantly converts that internal pain into an externalized, fixated rage. This is where the transition from casual monitoring to obsessive obsession takes place. The obsession is not about you as an individual. You have become a symbolic representation of the breach in their armor. To regain a state of psychological equilibrium, the narcissist feels an overwhelming, compulsive need to fix the equation. In their mind, the only way to heal a narcissistic injury is to reestablish total dominance over the source of that injury. They become hyper-focused on your movements, your emotional state, and your choices, not out of care, but because they need to engineer a scenario where they regain the upper hand, pull you back into their sphere, and ultimately discard you on their own terms to rewrite the ending of the story. This drive creates an obsessive loop in their behavior. They will analyze why their usual tactics failed, re-examine past interactions to find leverage points, and continuously monitor your life for any sign of vulnerability. If you appear happy, successful, or entirely unbothered, it acts as a continuous, compounding salt on that open psychological wound. Every piece of evidence showing that you are thriving without them reinforces the initial injury, fueling their fixation further. They view your independence as an active, deliberate attack on their reality, which justifies, in their minds, an relentless campaign to break your resolve and force an emotional reaction. Differentiating between missing control and a true narcissistic injury is essential for your own psychological safety. When someone misses you, their approach is marked by humility, accountability, and respect for your space. When a narcissist is driven by injury-fueled obsession, their approach is marked by urgency, entitlement, covert maneuvering, and an inability to accept a clear no. They are not obsessed with loving you. They are obsessed with neutralizing the threat your independence poses to their grandiosity. Every tactical move they execute from this state is designed to force you to acknowledge their importance, break your silence, and yield back the power you reclaimed. Keynote number 4 centers on the mechanics of the reverse Hoovering signal, a sophisticated tactic designed to flip the psychological dynamic of pursuit without the narcissist having to lower their posture or admit vulnerability. In standard manipulative dynamics, a traditional Hoover involves direct outreach, text messages expressing regret, sudden overtures of affection, or explicit requests to talk. However, when a narcissist encounters strong boundaries or recognizes that direct approaches will be rejected, they shift tactics entirely. They deploy reverse Hoovering, an indirect strategy engineered to make you feel compelled to initiate contact, effectively shifting the burden of pursuit back onto your shoulders while allowing them to maintain absolute plausible deniability. The psychological foundation of reverse Hoovering relies on manufacturing a compelling narrative hook within your shared environment or social ecosystem. Instead of reaching out to you, the narcissist creates a public or semi-public spectacle. This often manifests as a sudden, exaggerated crisis, a dramatic life shift, or a broadcast of extreme emotional distress. They might post vague, troubling statements on social media, hinting at a health scare, a personal tragedy, or a mental breakdown. Alternatively, they might stage a sudden, highly publicized transformation, acting as though they have undergone a profound spiritual awakening, hit an extraordinary professional milestone, or entered a deeply meaningful new relationship. The core objective here is pattern disruption paired with curiosity baiting. The narcissist knows your empathy profile. They understand the specific triggers, values, and caretaking tendencies you exhibited during the relationship. By broadcasting a situation that appeals directly to your sense of responsibility, compassion, or basic human curiosity, they set a subtle trap. They are counting on your natural urge to check in, offer help, ask for clarification, or even congratulate them. The moment you break your silence to send a simple, "Are you okay?" or "I heard what happened," the reverse Hoover has executed successfully. What makes this maneuver so dangerous is how it alters the power dynamic the instant you bite the bait. Because you initiated the contact, the narcissist immediately reclaims the dominant psychological posture. They can act surprised that you reached out, treat your concern with distant coldness, or frame you as the obsessed party who just couldn't stay away. By responding to their stage signal, you unwittingly validate their narrative that you are still monitoring them, still emotionally invested, and still available for engagement. They effectively bait you into breaking your own boundaries, allowing them to gain control while claiming to be the passive party. Understanding reverse hoovering requires looking beyond the emotional noise of whatever scenario they have staged. Whether it is a manufactured crisis or a grand display of personal reinvention, the underlying intent remains identical. It is an artificial beacon designed to draw your energy back into their orbit. A fixated narcissist will continuously test different forms of bait until they find the specific frequency that triggers a response. Recognizing this tactical shift allows you to view their dramatic broadcasts not as genuine life events requiring your intervention, but as calculated behavioral lures designed to reverse the flow of attention and reestablish their leverage over your life. Keynote number 5 explores the psychological mechanics of the silence response baseline, the ultimate counter-strategy that completely neutralizes a narcissist's fixated behavior and systematically dismantles their attempts at control. When dealing with a narcissist who is obsessed, it is essential to realize that their entire internal architecture relies on external validation, emotional reactions, and psychological feedback loops. They do not operate in a vacuum. They require a baseline of engagement to validate their sense of power. Silence, when executed not as a temporary passive-aggressive silent treatment, but as an absolute, unshakable boundary, deprives them of the very currency they require to sustain their ego structure. To understand why complete non-reactivity is so devastating to an obsessed narcissist, you must look at how they interpret human interaction. To a narcissistic mind, negative attention, such as anger, frustration, tears, or defensive arguments, is almost as valuable as positive attention. Any emotional output from you serves as quantifiable proof that they still hold real estate in your mind, that they possess the ability to alter your state of being, and that your internal peace is contingent on their actions. When you break your silence to defend yourself or express outrage at their probing tactics, you inadvertently feed the cycle, reassuring them that their presence still carries weight. When you adopt the silence response baseline, you withhold every form of emotional currency. You do not respond to microprobes. You do not acknowledge staged crises. You do not react to third-party triangulation. And you do not break down when presented with passive-aggressive provocation. This absolute absence of feedback creates a profound psychological vacuum for the narcissist. Without a reaction to measure, their intelligence-gathering efforts stall completely. They can no longer determine whether you are angry, hurting, indifferent, or completely oblivious to their presence. The unobservable state of your mind becomes an intolerable source of anxiety for an individual whose entire identity depends on managing how others perceive and react to them. As the silence response baseline persists, it forces the narcissist into an inescapable psychological loop. Initially, they may intensify their efforts, deploying increasingly dramatic tactics to force a breach in your resolve. However, as each wave of provocation meets the exact same wall of calm, absolute non-reactivity, their internal narrative begins to fracture. They are left alone in an echo chamber with their own unprocessable shame and insecurity, unable to project their internal instability onto you. The power balance permanently shifts. You are no longer a participant in their theater, but an independent entity completely outside their sphere of influence. Maintaining this baseline requires understanding that your silence is not a passive waiting period, but an active, strategic posture of total neutrality. It signals that you have severed the psychological umbilical cord entirely, and that their existence no longer alters your reality. By refusing to give them a target to hit, you starve their obsession at its root, locking them into a cycle where their only option is to eventually abandon their pursuit in search of an easier, more responsive source of validation.